The evening sky over the small human outpost was painted in shades of deep orange and fading gold. Ethan sat outside his modest metal hut, eating a simple dinner, bread, dried meat, and a small cup of water. The air was dry, filled with the faint hum of distant generators and the whisper of sand shifting in the wind. It had been another long day of work in the colony's storage yard, sorting crates of supplies shipped from Earth. He was tired, but his mind was restless. As he chewed slowly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. It came from the shadow of a large supply crate stacked just a few meters away. Ethan narrowed his eyes, leaning forward slightly. At first, he thought it was just the wind blowing loose fabric, but then he saw them, two glowing eyes, wide and fearful, staring at him from the darkness. The figure stepped out just enough for him to see. It was a small alien girl, thin and trembling. Her clothes torn and dusty. Her skin had a faint silver hue, with faint patterns along her cheeks that shimmered softly in the fading light. Her hair, or what looked like hair, was long and slightly tangled, glowing faintly at the tips as if holding the last light of the day. She didn't speak, only stared at the bread in his hand. Her expression was not anger or curiosity, but hunger, deep, desperate hunger. Ethan glanced around, wondering if anyone else had noticed. A few colonists were nearby, but they saw her and quickly looked away. One older man muttered under his breath as he passed Ethan, "Don't get involved, boy. They're trouble." Another woman shook her head and whispered to her friend, "Poor thing. But helping them always leads to problems." Ethan ignored them, his eyes still on the small figure hiding in the shadows. He took a slow breath, then, without a word, he tore off a piece of bread from his plate and held it out. The girl's eyes widened even more, and she took a small step back, as if expecting him to trick her. "It's all right," Ethan said softly, his voice calm and gentle. "It's for you." She looked from his face to the bread, and back again. For a moment, it seemed she would run, but then hunger overcame her fear. She stepped forward with slow, careful movements, her bare feet barely making a sound on the dusty ground. Her small hand reached out, trembling, and she took the bread. The moment it was in her grip, she clutched it to her chest, almost protectively. Then she backed away, never turning her eyes from him. She took a quick bite, her eyes closing for a second, as if the taste was more than she could handle. When she swallowed, she whispered something so softly that Ethan almost didn't hear it. "Thank you." Before he could say anything else, she turned and ran, disappearing between the supply crates like a shadow fading into the night. Ethan sat there for a moment, the piece of bread still missing from his plate, his mind spinning. He had seen alien children before, of course, but never one this close, never one so clearly alone. The colony was built on an alien world, but relations between humans and the native species were tense at best. Many locals lived far from the human settlement, keeping to their own. Only traders and workers came near, and even they rarely stayed long. He finished his meal slowly, his thoughts on the girl. She had been so thin, her arms almost fragile. And her voice, the way she had said thank you, it wasn't just gratitude. It was relief. A kind of relief that made him wonder how long she had gone without food. When night fell, Ethan found himself glancing toward the shadows where she had stood, half expecting her to return, but she didn't. Later, as he lay in bed listening to the hum of the colony's generators, he thought about the warnings the others had given him. He knew they might be right. Getting involved with local aliens could mean trouble, but something about her eyes had stayed with him. They hadn't just been the eyes of someone hungry. They had been the eyes of someone who had been ignored. Pushed aside and left to survive alone, Ethan sighed and turned on his side. Tomorrow, he decided, he would leave a little extra food near the crates, just in case she came back. The wind outside carried the scent of distant rain, rare for this dry planet. Somewhere in the darkness, far beyond the colony's lights, the alien girl was probably huddled alone, clutching that piece of bread like it was her only treasure. Ethan didn't know it yet, but this small act of kindness, given without thinking, was the start of something far greater than he could imagine. It was the beginning of a bond that would challenge the rules of the colony, defy the fears of two worlds, and bring a mother and daughter to his doorstep, asking for more than just food. They would be asking for a place in his life, and maybe in his heart. Morning sunlight spilled over the dusty roofs of the colony, casting long shadows on the ground. Ethan walked to the storage yard with his usual slow pace. Nodding at a few people he passed, but something felt different. The air was full of murmurs. Small groups of colonists talking in low voices, glancing in his direction. It didn't take long for him to figure out why. They say a strange alien kid was sneaking around last night. A man whispered to his friend near the water pump. She was seen near Ethan's hut, the other replied, giving Ethan a quick, suspicious look. Ethan kept walking, pretending not to hear, but inside, his thoughts were turning. So, the little girl's visit hadn't gone unnoticed. The colony wasn't large. Every unusual thing spread like wildfire. By midday, the gossip had grown. Some colonists claimed the girl was a thief. Others said she was a scout for hostile alien groups. One man loudly warned others, "If we let their kind get close, they'll take everything we have." Ethan stayed silent, but he could feel his jaw tighten. He didn't believe the girl was dangerous. She had been starving, not plotting. Still, he knew the others would never see it that way. That evening, Ethan walked back to the same spot where he'd first seen her, the shadow of the supply crates. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. From his pocket, he pulled out a small, wrapped bundle, a piece of bread, a slice of dried mock, a slice of dried sick fruit, and a small container of water. He set it gently on the ground. Then he stepped back, leaning casually against a crate, pretending to check inventory records on his datapad. Minutes passed, the wind blew dust around his boots, and the faint hum of a generator filled the silence. Just when he was starting to think she wouldn't come, there was movement from between two crates. The same small alien girl emerged. She froze when she saw him, but her eyes darted quickly to the bundle on the ground. Ethan didn't speak, didn't move. She approached slowly, her bare feet making almost no sound on the metal floor plates. When she reached the food, she looked up at him this time. Her eyes held less fear. She gave a small nod, then crouched down and picked up the bundle. Her hands trembled slightly. As she opened it, she took a sip of water, then ate quickly, as if she was afraid someone might snatch it away. Ethan watched her, noticing how the faint light from the crate's status panels reflected off the markings on her skin. They weren't random. They looked almost like delicate lines of a constellation. He wondered if they meant something in her culture. "You can come back tomorrow," he said softly. "I'll leave food here again." She looked at him, chewing slowly. Her lips parted like she might speak, but then she shook her head and turned away, disappearing into the shadows just as quickly as before. Over the next few days, this quiet exchange became a pattern. Ethan would leave food, wait nearby, and she would come to take it. Each time she stayed a little longer, her movements less hurried. Once, she even sat down on the edge of a crate while eating, keeping her eyes on him the whole time. It was as if she was trying to understand him, to decide if he was truly safe. One night, the colony's bar owner, a stout woman named Mara, approached Ethan. "I've heard you've been feeding that alien child," she said, her tone sharp. Ethan didn't deny it. "She's just a kid, Mara," he replied. "Kids grow up," Mara said, folding her arms. "And when they do, they remember who fed them and who didn't. That can be good or very bad." Ethan didn't answer, but he couldn't shake her words. The fourth night, something changed. Ethan left the food as usual, but instead of appearing alone, the girl peeked out from the crates. and simply watched him. Minutes passed. Finally, she stepped forward and sat down cross-legged on the ground. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by her boldness. "You're not afraid anymore," he said gently. She tilted her head slightly, as if weighing the meaning of his words. Then, for the first time, she spoke more than a single word. "You." "Not like others," she said in a quiet, halting voice, her accent strange but clear. Ethan felt a faint smile tug at his lips. "I'll take that as a compliment," he replied. The girl's eyes softened just a little, but she didn't smile. When she finished her meal, she stood up, but before leaving, she said something that made his chest tighten. "See you soon." That night, lying in his bed, Ethan thought about those 3 words. They weren't just casual, they carried a feeling, almost like a promise. He had no idea what soon meant to her, or what it might bring, but a quiet part of him hoped it meant she was starting to trust him. Still, he couldn't ignore the way the colony had been watching him lately. If she kept coming back, someone was bound to take notice, and that might bring trouble neither of them was ready for. Outside, the wind rattled loose panels on the storage shed, somewhere in the distance. Beyond the safety of the colony walls, the girl was finding a place to sleep, and perhaps, even now, she was deciding whether soon meant tomorrow, or something far more unexpected. It started with whispers. At first, Ethan thought it was just the usual colony gossip, the same low voices that always carried rumors about who was trading what, who owed who, or who had broken a rule. But by the second day after the storm, he knew the whispers were about him more than once. When he passed through the market square, conversations went quiet. Eyes followed him, not with curiosity, but with suspicion. Mara, the colony's bar owner, didn't bother with whispers. She stopped him in the middle of the street, hands on her hips, her voice loud enough for people nearby to hear. "I hear you've got company, Ethan," she said. Narrowing her eyes, Ethan kept his tone even. "Not sure what you mean." Her lips curved into a thin smile. "Oh, I think you do. And I think you'd better remember that feeding a stray is one thing. Keeping one in your home is another." That night, as Ethan returned to his hut, he noticed a strange stillness in the air. Leora was sitting near the heater, sharpening a blade that looked older than the colony itself. Sivra was curled up under a blanket, her glowing stone in her hands. "You were watched today," Leora said without looking up. Ethan frowned. "I noticed." "They suspect we are here," she said, her voice calm but edged with warning. The next morning, the trouble became more obvious. Ethan went to fetch supplies from the storage shed, only to find the door half open and several containers missing. Inside, a few sacks of dried food had been slashed open, their contents scattered across the floor. It wasn't theft, it was a message. Someone wanted him to know they didn't approve. Later that day, he found a rock thrown through his window. Wrapped around it was a piece of paper with crude letters scratched in charcoal. "Send them away." Sivra's eyes widened when she saw it. "They don't want us here," she whispered. Ethan knelt in front of her. "They don't know you." "They're just afraid," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Leora, however, looked at the note with cold detachment. "This is not fear," she said. "This is warning. And warnings are followed by action." That night, over a quiet meal, Leora spoke again. "If this becomes worse, we will leave," she said. Ethan shook his head. "No. If you leave now, whoever's behind this will think they can do it again to you. Or to someone else." Leora studied him for a long moment. "You are stubborn," she said. Though there was no anger in her voice. "Maybe," Ethan replied. "Or maybe I just don't like seeing people pushed out because others are afraid of them." Sivra reached across the table and held his hand. Her small fingers were warm, and the faint glow from her skin reflected in his eyes. "You're the only one who talks to us," she said softly. "The only one who sees us." Ethan gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You're not invisible to me," he said. "Over the next few days, The tension in the colony grew. Some colonists avoided Ethan completely, turning away when they saw him. Others muttered under their breath, making sure he could hear, and a few, like Mara, openly warned him he was making a mistake. But Ethan refused to send Leora and Sivra away. They stayed inside most of the time, keeping the curtains drawn. Ethan made quick trips to the market, buying extra food and water, careful not to draw too much attention. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan heard footsteps outside. When he opened the door, two men stood there. One of them, a broad-shouldered miner named Callan, stepped forward. "You've got strangers in there," he said. "We don't like strangers who bring trouble." Ethan's hand rested lightly on the edge of the door. "They're not trouble," he replied. Callan's eyes narrowed. "They will be. Send them away before something bad happens." Ethan met his gaze without blinking. "I'm not sending them anywhere," he said, and slowly closed the door. Inside, Leora was already standing, her blade in hand. "They will come again," she said. Ethan nodded. "Let them. I'm not afraid." But deep down, he knew this was more than just human prejudice. The way some colonists watched him, it felt like they were waiting for something bigger. And in the back of his mind, a thought was growing. What if the Valari weren't far behind, and the colony's fear was only a shadow of the real danger? That night, as Sivra slept peacefully for once, Ethan sat by the window, staring out into the dark. Every sound outside made his hand twitch toward the old hunting rifle under the bed. He didn't want to fight, but he was starting to realize that keeping Leora and Sivra safe might mean one was coming whether he wanted it or not. The night was colder than usual. A thin fog rolled in from the edge of the desert, wrapping the colony in a strange, muffled silence. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had been pacing by the window for over an hour, listening to the distant hum of the generators. Inside, Sivra was asleep on the cat, her small hand clutching her glowing stone. Leora sat by the door, her blade resting across her knees, her eyes half closed but alert. It happened just after midnight. The quiet broke with the sound of heavy footsteps in the dirt. Then came voices, low, sharp, and speaking in a language Ethan didn't know. Leora's eyes snapped open. "They're here," she said, her tone flat. Ethan didn't need to ask who they were. He moved to the door and peered through the narrow slit. Shapes were moving in the mist, tall figures, their skin faintly reflective under the dim colony lights. They wore armor that shimmered like polished stone, and each carried a weapon shaped like a long spear but glowing at the tip. There were 6 of them, and they were walking directly toward his hut. The first knock wasn't a knock at all. It was a heavy thud. Then another, harder, rattling the hinges. A voice called out, deep and commanding, "Send her out, human." The words were accented but clear. "We have no quarrel with you. Give us the woman and the child, and we will leave." Ethan glanced at Leora. Her markings seemed to burn brighter in the dim light. Her jaw set. "They will not leave," she said. "Not unless they take us or they are forced away." Ethan's heart pounded. He wasn't a soldier, but something in him refused to step aside. He grabbed the old hunting rifle from under his bed and checked the chamber. The voice outside came again, louder. "This is your only warning, human." Ethan took a deep breath, then opened the door just enough to step into the frame. The cold air hit his face, and the 6 armored figures stared at him, their eyes like shards of pale glass. "You're not taking them," Ethan said, his voice steady. The leader tilted his head slightly. "You would defend them against us?" he asked, as if genuinely confused. "They're under my protection," Ethan replied. The leader's mouth curved into something between a sneer and a smile. "Then you will share their fate." From behind him, Leora's voice cut through the air. "Valari," she called, stepping into view, her blade catching the light. the soldier's eyes fixed on her instantly. Sivra stirred from her sleep, her voice small and frightened. "Mama?" Ethan kept one hand on the rifle and stepped slightly in front of them. "If you want them," he said, "you'll have to go through me." The leader raised his weapon slowly, the glowing tip humming. "Very well," he said. But before he could give the order, a sharp shout came from the far side of the square. "Leave him be." Ethan turned his head in surprise. 3 colonists were stepping out from the shadows. Callan, a broad-shouldered miner who had once warned him to send them away, and 2 others, they stood a few paces behind Ethan, their own weapons raised. More footsteps followed, and soon a small group of colonists had gathered. The sight of humans standing beside an alien woman clearly unsettled the Valar. The leader hesitated. "This is not your fight," he said to the others, but Callan stepped forward. "Looks like it is now," he said. "We protect our own." Even if they weren't born here, Leora took that moment to move. Her hand darted to the small device hidden beneath her cloak. With a sharp twist, she activated it. A pulse of light burst from the device, flooding the square with a blinding tadging. Flash, the Valari staggered back, their weapons lowered by the time their vision cleared. Leora had moved to stand directly beside Ethan, her blade ready. "This is your last chance to walk away," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command. The leader looked at her for a long moment, his jaw clenched. Finally, with a sharp gesture, he turned and signaled his warriors to retreat. They melted back into the mist as silently as they had appeared. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving only the fading hum of their weapons in the air. The colonists began to disperse, muttering among themselves. Callan lingered just long enough to meet Ethan's eyes. "Guess I was wrong about you," he said, before walking away. When the square was empty, Ethan shut the door and leaned against it, his breath finally slowing. Sivra ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You didn't let them take us," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly, ruffling her hair. "No one's taking you anywhere, Atis." Leora stood nearby, watching him. "You risked your life tonight," she said quietly. Ethan met her gaze. "And I'd do it again." Outside, the mist began to lift, revealing the first faint light of dawn. But Ethan knew this wasn't over. The Valari would be back, and next time, they might not leave without a fight. The wind screamed against the metal walls of the colony. A heavy sandstorm had rolled in from the deep desert, turning the sky into a swirling wall of red and gold dust. The generators groaned under the strain, and most people had sealed themselves. Inside their homes, Ethan sat at his small table, listening to the storm batter the door. The air smelled faintly of static, and every now and then, a shudder ran through the walls. He had just poured himself a cup of hot tea when he heard it. A soft, hesitant knock. At first, he thought it was the storm rattling the door. But then it came again. 3 gentle taps. Frowning, he set down his cup and moved to the entrance. When he opened it, the wind rushed in, carrying sand and grit. Into the room, and standing there in the swirling dust, was the alien girl. Her hair whipped around her face, glowing faintly even in the dim light. Her clothes were torn worse than before, her small frame shivering in the cold wind, but she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a taller figure, a woman, clearly her mother. She was unlike any alien Ethan had ever seen up close. Her skin was the same silver tone as the girl's, but marked with intricate lines that glowed faintly. Her posture was straight, proud, yet her eyes were sharp and watchful. She looked at him as though measuring his worth in a single glance. The girl stepped forward, her voice small but clear over the howl of the wind. "This is my mother. We need a place to stay." Ethan's mind froze for a moment. He glanced between them, the child he had been feeding in secret, and the tall, regal woman now staring at him as if she expected a decision right there and then. Sand whipped around their legs, and he could see they had no protection against the storm. Without thinking too much, he stepped aside. "Come in," he said. His voice steady, they entered quickly, the mother guiding the girl with a hand on her shoulder. Ethan shut the door behind them, sealing out the storm's roar. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of sand hitting the walls outside. The mother's gaze swept over the small space, the simple table, the old heater in the corner. The single cot. She seemed unimpressed, yet there was something in her eyes. Relief, perhaps. The girl was already rubbing her cold hands together, her eyes darting toward the heater. Ethan poured them both hot water in metal cups. The mother hesitated before taking hers, sniffing it slightly as if checking for danger. The girl, however, drank quickly, her shoulders relaxing a little. "You're welcome to stay until the storm passes," Ethan said, his voice calm. The mother finally spoke, her voice deep and smooth, but carrying weight. "You gave my child food when others turned away," she said slowly. "That is not a small thing in our people's eyes." Ethan blinked, unsure what to say. "I just thought she was hungry," he replied. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "That is why it matters," she said. They ate a small meal together, bread, dried meat, and a few pieces of preserved fruit. The girl sat beside Ethan, closer than before, while her mother remained across the table, never looking away from him for long. He noticed how the mother's markings seemed to shift slightly when she moved, catching the light like tiny rivers of silver. There was an air about her, something that spoke of strength and history. When the meal was over, the girl leaned against Ethan's arm, her eyes drooping. Her mother watched but didn't stop her. Later, when the girl had fallen asleep in a chair by the heater, the mother spoke again, her voice quieter. "My name is Leora," she said, "and my daughter is Sivra." Ethan nodded, finally having names to put to their faces. Leora's gaze didn't waver as she continued. "We have been running for many days from those who wish to harm us." Ethan frowned. "Other aliens?" Her jaw tightened. "Yes. Ones who see us as enemies because of who we are." Ethan thought of the warnings from the colonists. If they knew he was sheltering not just a child, but her mother too, things could get complicated very quickly. But when he looked at Sivra, sleeping peacefully for the first time since he'd met her, he knew he couldn't send them back into the storm. "You can stay here until—" "It's safe," he said firmly. Leora's eyes softened just slightly. "You may not realize this, human, but by our laws, you have already claimed a bond with my daughter." Ethan blinked. "What does that mean?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze dropping to Sivra. "It means," she said at last, "that you may have changed our lives forever." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, small room felt strangely warm. Ethan didn't know what the days ahead would bring. He only knew that tonight, he was no longer alone, and neither were they. The storm had ended by morning. The colony streets were still coated in a thin layer of golden dust, and the air smelled clean after the long night of wind. Ethan stepped outside to check for damage, but his mind wasn't on the roof or the storage crates. It was on the two aliens still inside his hut. Sivra was awake and sitting near the heater, her legs tucked under her, playing quietly with a small round stone that glowed faintly in her hands. Leora stood nearby, her tall frame still as a statue, watching Ethan with the same sharp, measuring eyes as before when he stepped back inside. She spoke without preamble. "You deserve to know why we are here," she said, her voice calm but heavy with meaning. Ethan nodded and leaned against the wall. Waiting, Sivra glanced up at her mother, then at him, as if she already knew what was coming. Leora began to seethe. Leora began to speak slowly, as though each word carried weight on our world. "Giving food to a starving child is not just kindness," she said. "It is a vow. A promise to protect that life as your own." Ethan blinked. "I didn't know," he said honestly. Her eyes softened slightly. "No, you could not have known. But that does not change the bond you created." Sivra smiled faintly, clutching her glowing stone tighter. "In my people's law," Leora continued, "when you fed her, you became her lifekeeper." Ethan frowned. "That sounds serious." "It is more than serious," Leora said, her tone firm. "It means that you are now tied to us by custom, by honor, and by bloodline, if we choose." Ethan tried to process this. He had simply given a hungry girl bread and water, but to them, it meant a lifelong connection. He sat down across from Leora. "So, who exactly are you running from?" he asked. Her jaw tightened, the silver markings on her skin seeming to glow a little brighter. "There is a faction among our people," she said. "They call themselves the Valerie, and they see my family as a threat. Because I carry a title they want for themselves." Ethan studied her. "You're not just anyone, are you?" Leora gave a faint, humorless smile. "No. And that is why Sivra was starving when you found her. We had been separated after a raid, and she found her way to the human colony while I was still in hiding." Sivra looked at Ethan, her voice soft. "I waited. I hoped Mama would come. But you came first." Her words made something in Ethan's chest tighten. "I'm glad I did," he said quietly, "for the next hour." Leora told him more about their customs. He learned that the glowing patterns on their skin were unique to each family, like human fingerprints, but also carrying symbolic meaning. He learned that the small glowing stone in Sivra's hand was a family token, a kind of heirloom passed through generations. He learned that Leora's clan had been powerful once, but the Valari's rise had forced them into hiding. The more Ethan listened, the more he understood the danger they were in. If the Valari found them here, they wouldn't hesitate to cause trouble for the human colony and the colony. Well, they might not protect two aliens, no matter the circumstances. When the conversation paused, Ethan stood and moved to the cupboard, pulling out what food he had left. "You can stay here for now," he said, "but we'll need more supplies." "If you're both going to be safe and fed," Leora tilted her head, studying him as if trying to see the truth behind his words. "You are taking a risk for us," she said. Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. But leaving you out there would be worse." Sivra grinned, a rare sight. "You're different from the others," she said. "The others look at us like we're nothing." Ethan sat back down. "Not to me," he said. And the girl's smile grew wider, but even as they spoke, Ethan knew the peace wouldn't last. The colony was small, and people noticed things. Two unfamiliar aliens staying in his hut wouldn't go unnoticed for long. And if the Valari were as determined as Leora claimed, they might already be looking this way. That night, after Sivra had gone to sleep, Leora stood by the door, her arms folded. "You should know," she said quietly, "that the Valari do not stop. If they learn we are here, they will come, no matter who stands in their way." Ethan met her gaze. "Then they'll have to go through me first," he said. For the first time since meeting her, Leora's eyes softened into something almost like respect. "You may not realize it, human," she said, "but you are already part of our story, outside." The colony lights flickered in the darkness, far beyond them, in the deep shadows of the desert. Unseen eyes might already have been watching, and inside Ethan's small hut, a fragile alliance, and perhaps something more, had begun to take shape. The morning after the confrontation, the colony was buzzing. Word had spread fast. Not only had the Valar come into the settlement, but a group of colonists had stood against them. For some, it was a sign of unity. For others, it was a dangerous step toward trouble. Ethan knew it wouldn't be long before the council called him in. Sure enough, by midday, a messenger arrived at his door. "The council wants you, and the aliens, at the meeting hall," the young man said nervously, avoiding Leora's gaze. Ethan glanced at her. She gave a small nod. "It is time," she said. The meeting hall was a wide, low building at the center of the colony. Inside, the air was tense, filled with murmurs. 5 council members sat at a long table, their expressions unreadable. Dozens of colonists stood around the walls, eager to hear what would happen. Ethan, Leora, and Sivra walked to the front. Sivra held Ethan's hand tightly, her small fingers clinging as if letting go might make him disappear. One of the council members, a stern man named Harland, leaned forward. "You've brought danger to our doorstep," he said to Ethan. "The Valerie could return with more soldiers. And this time, they might not leave without bloodshed." Ethan stood tall. "They came for Leora and Sivra. Not for the colony," he said. "If we send them away, we're no better than the people who ignored Sivra when she was starving." Harlan's mouth tightened. "Your compassion is noted. But we have to think about the safety of everyone here." Before Ethan could answer, another council member, a woman named Drayla, spoke up. "Safety is not just walls and weapons," she said. "It's knowing we stand for something. And last night, people stood together because of him." A murmur ran through the room. Some nodded, others shook their heads. Leora stepped forward, her presence commanding even in the human hall. "If you send us away, the Valari will hunt us in the open," she said. "They will kill us. And they will remember that humans turned us out. That will not keep you safe. It will only mark you as weak." Her words carried a weight that silenced the murmurs. One council member, an older woman with silver hair, studied Sivra for a long moment. "Child," she said gently, "why do you wish to stay here?" Sivra glanced up at Ethan, then back at the woman. "Because here, someone sees me," she said. "Here, I'm not just nothing. Here, I have a human." The hall went quiet. Even Harland seemed caught off guard by the simplicity of her words. Ethan felt the girl's small hand squeeze his again. He realized just how much this meant to her. After a long pause, the council's leader, an older man named Arachan, spoke. "We will allow them to stay under Ethan's protection," he said. "But if danger comes again, the colony will decide how to act." It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. A ripple of mixed reactions went through the crowd. Some disapproving, some relieved. When they left the hall, the afternoon sun was bright. The dust from yesterday's fog had settled, and the air felt strangely lighter. Ethan glanced at Leora. "You're safe." "For now," he said. She met his gaze. "No. We are safe because of you," she replied. Back at his hut, they shared a quiet dinner for the first time. There was no sense of urgency, no tension hanging over them. Sivra laughed softly when Ethan told her a story from his childhood, and Leora listened with a faint, amused smile. It was a small thing, but to Ethan, it felt like the beginning of something real. Later, as Sivra grew sleepy, she leaned against him and whispered, "You're my human, forever, right?" Ethan ruffled her hair gently. "Forever," he said. Leora, standing by the doorway, watched them for a moment before speaking. "In our ways, when someone becomes a lifekeeper, it is for life. Not just until danger passes," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "Good," he replied. "Because I'm not planning on letting either of you go." Outside, the night was clear. The stars stretched endlessly above, bright and sharp against the dark sky. The threat of the Valerie was not gone. Ethan knew that. But so was the certainty that he wouldn't face it alone. He had not just given a hungry girl food. He had found a family in the most unexpected way, and as the three of them sat together in the warmth of the small hut, the galaxy felt a little less lonely.